Have you ever stared down a challenge that just felt impossible? An opponent so big, so well-funded that winning feels like a total long shot. Well, believe it or not, about 2,500 years ago, a small group of soldiers basically wrote the playbook for that exact situation. And it's a masterclass in strategy that is, I think, more relevant now than ever, especially if you're trying to build something new against some giant entrenched competitors. All right, let's get into it.
So picture this. It's 480 BC. The Persian Empire, which is the biggest thing the world has ever seen at this point, is crashing down on Greece. And at this narrow mountain pass called Thermopylae, a tiny force of about 7,000 Greeks, led by just 300 elite Spartan warriors, decides to stand in their way. I mean, this isn't just David versus Goliath. This is like David versus an entire army of Goliaths.
You look at this on paper, and it's just a suicide mission. The Persian army was absolutely overwhelming. So the real question isn't how they fought, it's why. Why did they choose to make a stand there, of all places? And the answer? Well, it's not about having a death wish. It's about a really profound strategic insight that can totally change how any small team, any startup, thinks about competing.
And that brings us to the very first lesson from the Spartan playbook. It's not about the size of your army or your company, it's all about the battlefield you choose. See, as a small, nimble team, your biggest advantage is that you get to pick your fights.
I mean, just look at the scale of this mismatch. It's staggering. Historians figure Xerxes' army had up to 300,000 soldiers, and facing them, just 7,000 Greeks. That's a force ratio of something like 40 to 1. If this was a fight on an open field, it would have been over in, minutes?
But here's the thing. The Greeks didn't fight on an open field. They chose Thermopylae, a coastal pass so incredibly narrow it was actually nicknamed the Hot Gates. And this is just brilliant. They found a piece of ground where the Persians' #1 strength, their overwhelming numbers, actually became their biggest weakness.
Think about it, right? The massive Persian war machine couldn't just swarm them. They had to funnel their own soldiers into this tiny pass in these small, manageable waves. This choke point effectively leveled the playing field. It turned one huge, impossible battle into a whole series of small, controllable fights where the superior skill of the Spartans could absolutely dominate. So for any startup out there, the lesson is crystal clear. You have to find your own narrow pass. This is your niche market, a place that basically restricts your competitor's ability to move. Maybe it's a super specific technical problem they aren't built to solve, or a group of customers that their mass market approach totally ignores. In that niche, their massive size becomes a liability, and your focus becomes your deadliest weapon. But having the perfect terrain is useless if you don't have the right team to actually defend it. And this brings us to the second pillar of the Spartan playbook. It's not just about finding your narrow pass, it's about having your own 300. Spartans weren't just born elite, they were forged. The Agogo was this brutal 13-year training program that started when they were just 7 years old. And this wasn't just about lifting heavy things. It was a whole system of psychological and social engineering. They weren't just training soldiers, they were literally designing a capability. So how does this idea translate to today? Well, it's through this concept of tiny teams. And the key thing to get here is that these teams are small by design, because it makes them better, faster, more focused, not because some manager decided to cut headcount to save a few dollars. It's a really fundamental shift in how we think about getting things done. Let me give you a crazy modern example. Look at this number, $200 million. That's the estimated annual recurring revenue of the AI company Midjourney. Now take a guess. How many people do you think it takes to pull that in? A few hundred? 1,000? 11. That's it. No, that is not a typo. Midjourney generated $200 million in revenue with a team of just 11 people. This is the modern 300 in action, a tiny, hyper-capable team creating an absolutely outsized impact. And their success really boils down to a few core principles. They use AI as a real teammate, automating whole workflows. They operate with this insane level of trust and transparency, which just gets rid of all the human friction that slows down bigger companies. With fewer layers of management, decisions are basically instant. And crucially, they pay top of market to get and keep the absolute best people because they know one A player is worth way more than 3 average ones. Okay, so you've got your narrow pass, you've got your elite team. The final piece of the puzzle is leadership. In a high-stakes, bet-the-company kind of fight, you just can't lead by committee. You need a very specific kind of leader.
This is maybe the most famous line from the entire battle. When the Persian messenger demanded the Spartans lay down their weapons, King Leonidas gave his iconic two-word reply, molon labe, which means come and get them. Now, this isn't just tough talk. It's a perfect window into a singular, defiant, and totally mission-focused mindset. Ben Hardawitz famously made this distinction between a peacetime CEO and a wartime CEO. The peacetime CEO works to build consensus, to empower everyone. But when you're facing an existential threat, you need a wartime CEO, someone like Leonidas, who is completely intolerant of anything that distracts from the mission. They don't have time for consensus. They only have time to win. And this points to a really tough lesson for a lot of leaders. When your survival is on the line, there is zero, and I mean zero, room for deviation from the plan. When Steve Jobs came back to a nearly bankrupt Apple, he didn't run a bunch of innovation workshops. No, he focused the entire company on just a handful of products that absolutely had to succeed. That right there, that's the wartime mindset. So we all know how the battle ended, but this brings us to the most counterintuitive and maybe the most powerful lesson of them all. Sometimes a tactical loss can be your greatest strategic victory. Let's just be super clear about this. The Greeks lost the Battle of Thermopylae. A local showed the Persians a hidden path, they were outflanked, and the guys left defending the pass were wiped out. But that defeat sent a shockwave through Greece that ultimately saved the entire country. The 3 days that Leonidas and his men bought were priceless. That delay, it allowed the Greek navy to escape being trapped and destroyed. It gave Athens just enough time to evacuate its entire population. And it gave the Allies time to fortify their final defensive line. The Spartans absolutely lost the battle, but their sacrifice saved the war. What the Spartans created here was something we can call strategic capital. It's an asset that's not built with money, but with courage and reputation. Their sacrifice became a legend, a story of defiance that inspired all of Greece to unify and fight back. That story, that brand, was a more powerful force multiplier than the 300 men themselves. For a startup, this is huge. Turning a temporary market standoff into a story of resilience is how you build long-term industry influence. So the ultimate lesson here is that not every single fight is worth winning right now. As a mentor, I tell founders this all the time. Your limited resources are actually a gift. They force you to make better, harder choices. Sometimes a strategic retreat, or a product you have to kill, or a market you have to abandon, sometimes that's the very move that lets you survive and go on to win the bigger war. And that leaves us with one final challenge, a concept some people call the Spartan call. See, focus is a discipline, and that means saying no a lot. So I'll leave you with this question to apply to your own work, your own mission. What is the one good idea, that one tempting distraction that you need to kill right now to protect your singular vision and win your war?